Welcome, guys, back to the Grateful Living podcast. Today, I'm thankful to have Raza Shaikh with me. Raza is a managing director at Launchpad Venture Group, a Boston area angel investing group focused on early stage investments, primarily in high tech and life sciences. Launchpad is one of the largest and most active angel groups in the United States. Raza is also a general partner at Beacon Venture Partners, a company that also invests in early stage companies. And finally, Raza is a co host for the Onboards podcast with Joe Ayoub. Raza, thank you so much for joining us.
Arnav, it's a pleasure. Glad to be here.
Of course, thankful to have you on. So, for the people that don't know you as well, can you set the scene and kind of take us back to your beginning roots of, where you grew up, your family situation, what type of kid you were, and things like that?
For sure. Arnav, I grew up in Pakistan, a city called Lahore. Um, I guess early days. So grew up in a house. I remember where we didn't have running water for the toilet. All the way then, I would say, as a kid, I was a good student, got good grades, worked hard, that sort of thing. Um, Got my degree in computer science from a place called FOST. It is at that time it was not a university. Later became a university, but I did my undergrad in computer science there. It's still one of the top schools for getting computer science education in Pakistan. From there, I worked actually in the software industry as a programmer, a developer, a product manager back in Lahore for almost half of my career. And I was working for a company called TechLogix at that time, which was founded by three MIT graduates. Um, we were working for product and services companies. I would be helping build um, mobile transaction platforms or other high-tech products for US companies, including video conferencing software, sitting in Lahore. And TechLogix around that time thought, hey, it might be helpful for Raza to be in the US. And they supported my H-1B visa, which is a typical path for coming to the US as an immigrant for high tech work. I jokingly called myself a high tech laborer, and I was brought here doing consulting with TechLogix, which was a great amount of fun. I learned a lot. Obviously, new to this country, I actually landed in Boston, and ever since have been professionally and living right in the area. TechLogix was doing tremendous good work, but I really got a little bored and jumped into my first startup as an early employee. And that startup was initially building software and later hardware and robotics for life science drug discovery application, a very specialized area called protein crystallography. And we were doing the automation problem with liquid handlers, imaging robots, and incubation robots, along with the software that goes with it. That was also just an incredible experience in learning. Um, I would drive the truck into Cambridge to install the robot with all of these big pharma companies and research labs. So I know which roads in Cambridge you can't take the truck. So it was just a typical startup experience where you do a lot of things, you learn a lot, and that company actually did very well. I ended up at the Broad Institute, which is a collaboration between MIT and Harvard. It is actually a spin-off out of the Human Genome Project from the early days when they had finally sequenced the genome and they're like, what do we do with this now? The Broad Institute is a fundamental science research organization. But they did this tremendously valuable thing there where they brought in a lot of professional managers, software developers, along with scientists, application engineers, and even business folks. So I was the professional manager brought in to build this platform. I call it the Factory of Science. And we were doing two things: small molecule synthesis. We would make a new molecule that never existed in nature, but in high numbers and quantities, tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands eventually. And we would do also what is called high throughput screening, which is a way of saying we're going to try out these molecules and see if anything sticks or inhibits or activates a behavior that we want in biology. And that's an early stage of test tube testing for things that can possibly in the future become therapeutics. So really, that was also just a tremendous and incredible experience for me. Again, as an immigrant coming over, learning all these things that was just new to me. This is around the time when the iPhone came out, and I decided to start a company around games and apps, casual games, casual apps. The company did all right and got acquired, and we started a company called NorthBay. NorthBay was started on the premise that at that time, only a few percent of the total IT spend was on the cloud. So 95% plus is not on the cloud. And these are the early days of cloud, and we realized that the writing is on the wall, that this is a generational transformation. Everything new that would be built on the cloud, and the enterprise has to move their current workloads onto the cloud. So NorthBay was founded on the premise that the enterprise will need a lot of help in doing that. And the company just got bootstrapped, grew tremendously, and is actually doing incredible work. We aligned ourselves with Amazon Web Services, and also just grew as Amazon Web Services or AWS grew, and just also had a tremendous journey in building and growing that company. So that's kind of up to the point of my journey where I was working, building companies, and helping build companies. Around my time in NorthBay, I started connecting with the local startup ecosystem. It would start with Mass Challenge, for example, Techstars, and other incubators and accelerators in the area that help foster innovation and help startups. I got engaged and involved initially as a mentor, advisor, a judge for these pitches. And over time, I started thinking that maybe I should perhaps invest in these companies. And about 6 or 7 years ago, I started actually writing small checks into startups, mostly from people that I knew and people that I got connected with. And soon I actually got introduced to the concept of angel groups. The first group that I joined in the Boston area is called Sky Ventures Group. And Sky Ventures is specifically focused on life science, healthcare, medical devices. A gentleman named Eyal Giffen runs that group, has been doing a tremendous job. And that's how I ultimately connected with Launchpad. I had been Launchpad member for more than 6 years, and then started actually more seriously investing with the group. And there are certain benefits and things that you get being part of the group, mainly that you share the work of finding companies, evaluating companies, investing in companies, and then even supporting the companies as a group. And right at the beginning of the pandemic, I was enjoying this so much and really thought that this is one of the best things to ever happen to me. I decided to join the Launchpad Venture Group as part of the management team. Um, and just before that, my partner Alex Brown and I had started a venture capital fund that also invests in early stage companies. We did our fund one about almost 3 years ago, and that's what is Beacon Venture Partners. Beacon Venture Partners also invests in companies similar to what Launchpad invests in. In fact, it does tend to invest in Launchpad companies a lot more. And now we're raising our second fund and trying to invest even more. So Arnav, I know I went pretty fast, but I gave you like a quick synopsis of my journey from a kid in Lahore to coming here and building companies and then investing in these companies.
Yeah. No, thank you. So, obviously growing up in Pakistan, that's a unique vantage point that a lot of people don't have the perspective of. I think the West characterizes that area in an interesting manner. I'm
Mhm.
curious, like, um, you know, is there something that you would like to say about the country or growing up there, um, that comes to mind?
I think it wasn't anything different than if I was growing up in India, for example. But Pakistan additionally has this unique, geopolitical connotations associated with it, and has a history from, the Soviet war in Afghanistan to 9/11 and what went after that with the war on terror. And when I came here, I never personally have faced anything, negative. For example, I've been, really fortunate to be among folks who understood those things and, in fact, were quite welcoming. Of course, I was part of the I think it was called the NCRS program. You can call it the Muslim registry, and I had to get fingerprinted. And every time I went out of the country or into the country, and had a lot of check-ins to be done and so on.
Yeah.
But apart from those type of things, I never really saw anything that would be negative to me personally. In fact, on the other hand, Boston has been tremendously welcoming, supportive, and I've had a great amount of friendships built here, businesses that I built here, investments that I've made here. So I guess Pakistan is part of my heritage, and it's obviously that's where I grew up. But U.S. is home now, and that's where I'm building my life.
Yeah. I'm curious, at that time, obviously you talked about TechLogix bringing you over as a technology, consultant. Prior to that, was there any mindset, when you were in your early career as a software developer or program manager to come to the US, or was that not really on your mind?
It turns out that even starting from my first job out of college, I ended up working for companies that had customers in the US. For example, the video conferencing company that I mentioned was working for a video conferencing pioneering company here in the US that I think came out of MIT Media Lab called PictureTel. And even from my first job, I was exposed to U.S. Work norms, U.S. culture, and and modern technology and building tech products. The second company that I worked with, for example, was a venture-backed company. So for the first time, even sitting in Lahore, I learned about, what are stock options? Did not get that concept initially. So um, I was just, it happened luckily that I was exposed to Western world and the US throughout my career. In fact, for the longest time, I was kind of not really thinking about moving to the US. Only when TechLogix thought, hey, maybe you should consider coming over, I thought about it and ultimately said yes. Um, so part of it was my a lot of my peers, my batchmates had actually moved to the US much earlier than me, and so I would also be in touch with them, so I kind of knew the US side in a decent manner.
Yeah. I'm curious, is there any advice you would, obviously, today there's many people that come from Pakistan to the US. As you look back at your transition, is there, a piece of advice you would give to someone on, obviously adjusting, to the new culture in the
Yeah.
US?
When I landed here, there were actually a number of key people in my life at that time after my landing that actually helped me adjust here. Um, it turns out that there was a roommate situation available for one of the folks from TechLogix, and I became roommate with that person. And they were actually well connected, and they were able to help me, make more friends here, um, tell me how to, buy a car. Um, I did not know how to drive a car before coming to the U.S. So I think my advice for anybody moving over is, find the folks that would be helping you. Don't stay in your own bubble thinking I'm going to go back, which of course is fine. People also go back. Um, some people who migrate here on an H1 are thinking that I'm coming here for the economic opportunity. I'm going to work here for a few years, save up some money, and then I'm going to go back. And of course, everybody has their choices, and there are many good reasons for people to actually go back. Um, but think of becoming part of the society. Uh, and I think America is actually really good at that. I see that a little different in other countries, let's say Canada, where you can still, they'll call themselves as a salad bowl. You're together, but you're still a little, different or separate as well. Whereas I think America is actually really good at being a melting pot. You do get, especially your kids that grow up here, to be American. So I think just the general advice would be, you've come to this country, make the best of it.
Yeah. I think maybe the final question on Pakistan, for anyone looking to understand the country's history better or things like that, do you, I mean, I don't know if you do, but do you have any personal recommendations on either movies, books, or restaurants that are good around, Massachusetts or anything like that?
Yeah, I think one movie actually is that's a really good question. I think one movie that I will definitely recommend watching is called Charlie Wilson's War. And I think it really actually gives people a perspective of, what Pakistan and that geopolitical situation vis-a-vis the US had been. Um, Another movie, believe it or not, I would recommend watching is called Black Hawk Down. It's the movie is not about Pakistan. It is about the helicopter crash and how the team um, uh, you know, cope with that, the U.S. military. Um, but there's one part of that movie where there are these UN peacekeepers that are brought. Um, Turns out those were peacekeepers from Pakistan, and they had way more casualties than the U.S. In that. But the movie obviously is very perspective from our U.S. perspective. So that part is just mentioned as one or two yelling on the walkie-talkie for something. So maybe those two movies. Um, I think it would be good for if people want to learn more to find ways and resources. Um, and But I think most of the media that we generally have available is the public mainstream media, and that'll obviously tell you what it'll tell you about Pakistan. Um, and Pakistan still continues to be in a very um, uh, challenging geopolitical situation where they're in the midst of it and have to balance, for example, the rising China on one end to now the U.S. Becoming maybe I wouldn't say declining, but towards a declining power, and uh, the folks in Pakistan have to kind of play this three-dimensional chess on how to keep Pakistan's interests the most from this.
Yeah, yeah. So now more to your business career. I guess, is there any piece of advice that you would give to an early, you know, um, individual in their career, 22, 23, you went from software developing to program manager to technology consultant. Any, you know, words of advice on as you look back on those experiences on maybe something that people should be looking for in terms of their job and what to get out of it, or anything about those specific careers on consulting or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, everybody has to look at the careers themselves. One general theme that has been emerging in the last 20 years is that people tend to have multiple careers in their lifetime now. It's not typical, but it's becoming more common to have one career. For example, my career was a programmer and developer all the way to managing teams and managing technical work, um, to now I have a career in investing into startups. Those are relatively different things. One prepared me for the other, and so on. I think everybody figures out what's the career arc for them, um, and he or she needs to think about what they want to be when they grow up. Um, Obviously, there's two big choices also that especially younger folks now have, which is work for somebody or build something on my own. Um, and I think people have to think of that choice in their context and see what they want to do. If you see a problem that needs to be solved and you think you can actually solve that problem and build a business around it, you know, definitely jump in. But if you also think that you're making a difference in the company that you're working, and you're good at building things, you can also continue working for others, even though it's sometimes phrased as a bad thing. Both has have plus and minuses. I mean, all other general advice are, generic, like eat your vegetables and be healthy and, be mindful and be thinking about how you can help yourself and everybody around you the best. So I guess that's the heaping of general advice.
Yeah. Entrepreneurship, right? So, I think you had been in this country for 6 years and then you started Kendall Square Labs. I'm curious, you know, you've moved to a new country. You've only been here 6 years. I mean, how did you have the, how did you get over that fear? And, what was your thought process in trying out, that venture?
Yeah, well, believe it or not, when you are on an H1, you technically can't really start a business or a startup. Or there are much harder ways to do that, or not easy ways. And just that journey of from being from an H1 to becoming a green card holder to becoming a citizen actually takes quite a long time for most. For me, I think it took maybe 15 years or more. And you couldn't really start companies until you know that you can be in this country permanently. So I see a lot of folks have that hesitation. In retrospect, I do think when I was on an H1, I didn't think I could start a company, and so I never thought about it. And turns out there are ways, and you can do certain things. And now I think even the government is a little more encouraging of that, and people are advocating for the startup visa, for example, and things like that.
Yeah.
But my advice would be like, if you think you want to start a company, you should think of ways of how you can do it, even when you're on an H1. But I think that advice is independent. Like, you shouldn't start a company just because everybody is, or that's the thing to do. But for myself, thinking back, yeah, maybe I could have done some things earlier, but I just didn't know, or was not as exposed to the world of startups and entrepreneurship. And took me a while. Once I learned a few things, saying, "Oh yeah, you could start your own company as well."
I'm just curious in terms of mindset, of leaving a corporate environment to start your own venture. I'm sure, maybe your parents had words of advice or friends or family on, do you think this is the best idea? How did you find peace in that decision?
It wasn't well, I was at my life stage where, let's say, I would have some money and I didn't need an immediate salary. So it wasn't like as hard of a decision saying I'm quitting my job and I won't have any money. How do I eat? Um, and at least most of the folks around me were not in the entrepreneurial circle, so I couldn't get really, any much advice. So looking back, I would say, try to find folks in the startup world, investors, advisors, mentors, and run those questions by them, saying, "Hey, I'm thinking of quitting my job. Should I or not? And is this an idea that I should pursue?" Now, of course, they can't tell you whether the idea is going to work or not. So they can't tell you, or I don't know. I don't know how would they be able to say, "Do this idea. This is great and it will work." Um, all they can tell you is, "Hey, this is a risk, but should you take that risk?" And the decision ultimately comes from within, or from you. Um, so the general advice would be, try to talk with more people. And fortunately, in the last 15 years, fostering of startups, innovation has become really popular, and a lot of people are very helpful. Every VC in town, every angel in town, all the wonderful incubators, accelerators. There's a whole village that's there to help you raise your kid.
Yeah. You talked about it, but you eventually sold that first company. I'm curious, as you look back, is there any advice that you have on selling a company?
Well, I mean, selling the company can mean two things. If you've raised money, then it means slightly something else versus if you haven't raised money. If you haven't raised money, then you're the only decision maker. Uh, generally you're looking for, am I good getting a good value? Do I think I can build even more, or is this the right time to hand off the baton, let somebody else build it from there? Um, but if you raise money, then you have your board and your shareholders that ultimately make the decision when and if to sell the company. So that becomes part of the calculus. So, you know, you are taking outside money if you fundraise, that knowing that only when it exits is when the investor makes money. So you're already agreeing that at some point you will sell, or maybe in great cases IPO the company, so investors can get their money back. Um, Great companies are bought, not sold, is one saying that goes in these circles. Um, so I think it's, again, the general set of advice is you're looking to build a company that you ultimately want to monetize and sell, and you're trying as a CEO or founder to best increase the value of that company. So you could bring it to a stage where you think now somebody else can actually scale it much better than you can, and it's time to monetize.
Yeah. So, you sold it to NorthBay Solutions and become a co-founder and CTO there. Um, you know, I'm curious as you look at that journey, um, of, having other co-founders and partners. Is there a piece of advice as you're going into a venture with, say, two other people or something like that that um, you would give to someone thinking about,
Yeah,
starting a company?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, selection of co-founders and who you work with is a really important thing. You are going to go through a journey that's tough for a pretty long time. So it actually helps if you have maybe worked together before, you share philosophy on things, and at the same time, you're able to kind of divide, saying, here are the things that I'm better at, and I'll take this area, and here are other things that you should take, my partner. Um, Co-founder conflict, believe it or not, is actually a pretty up there in the top five reasons for companies to fall out or fail. But having great co-founders also is like one of the biggest thing you can have in your life in building companies, because these are the set of people that are 1 plus 1 is equal to more than that, and you really build things as a team. Um, and I think anybody who's going on that journey needs to kind of try before you buy, date, do some work together before like straight jumping into it. Could work out very well. In some ways, being a co-founder is harder than getting divorced because you're still not out of the business.
Mm.
Um, Co-founder conflict can be hugely disruptive and very detrimental to the economics of the company. And that's one reason why investors kind of insist on founder vesting when they invest the money. You don't want your college roommate who you thought was a great co-founder take 1/4 of the company and then just quit and say, "Hey, I'm going to sit on the beach and not work." Um, and just own the company 25%. Um, so I think you've highlighted a great point that finding and figuring out the right co-founder is such an important step in starting and building a company.
Yeah. In terms of the thesis of, you talked about it a little bit, but at that time, I guess, you know, only 5% of storage was, on the cloud. Um, I'm curious, especially now today, where some people think NFTs have a future and some don't. You know, at that time when it's only 5%, like how did you feel confident in that being the thesis for the
Yeah,
company and for things to change and grow to where they are today?
that's a very good question. I'll take a simple example of before the advent of the cloud. As a programmer, as a developer, if I needed to productionize something and say we're launching this product, I may even have up to 6 months of lead time to order physical servers. These are large computers with more memory and compute that I need in order to satisfy my production requirements. But I would literally have to order those. When they come in, I have to install them in the rack. I have to wire them up. I have to install basic software on them. I have to configure my software and my product on it. It was really a painful process. And as a programmer, I learned that on the cloud, you can do it within a minute. You can spin up a compute instance with pre-installed software, pre-configured, like super quick. And you're only paying for when you use it. That was a fundamental shift. So as a consumer of those things, you really realize, wow, this is different. And you understand that there's no reason for anybody to now order servers. I'm just using the example of servers. Same applies to storage. Same applies to all the other things that the cloud offers. Um, and maybe the data point that we got was we attended one of the first Amazon's AWS's largest conference called AWS reInvent. And you could see the incredible energy and excitement on the notion of the cloud at that time. And this is literally now almost 10 years ago. And it's just very clear that if I was to build anything new, there's no reason for me not to do it on the cloud. It's faster, cheaper, all of those good things, and it's 10 times better, order of magnitude better. So some things and trends you can just clearly see. And it's not just us that saw that, like everybody could see. And hence, an entire industry and an entire ecosystem emerged around the cloud.
Yeah. Another part, for a company like North Bay that scaled quite a bit during your time there, is managing employees. I'm curious, how did you um, hire, how did you foster good company culture such that, employees stayed, things like that. How did you manage that HR aspect?
Yeah, I mean, every single company that is built on people, and these are really bright, a lot of the time young um folks who have maybe technical education, computer science degree, and now want to work in the industry. At North Bay, we did a few things in addition to what everybody that wants to do good HR, hire good employees. Uh, uh, Number one, we really fostered the concepts around agile development of software, and that's actually not only helpful in building good software, it's actually also very helpful in building good teams. We had a concept of a one team model where even our customer teams onshore and our engineering teams offshore would combine themselves as a single team across continents. And the famous stand up meeting that is common in Agile and Scrum development would happen with the entire team. And that really just fosters a way of like, hey, we're working directly on the problem and understand and hence can relate to the mission. Helps a lot with the team building. One other thing that we did, we called it North Bay University. We would have particular hands-on curriculum on almost every technology managed service tool that AWS would come up that we were using, um, and also on core concept of industrial strength software writing, uh, and everybody would go through curriculum of that when needed. It was always paired with a senior member of the team, and they are helping you do a hands-on assignment on how to learn AWS Kinesis to the extent that you can use it for real production, real world applications. Um, I think also all people work on the mission, really. So I think it's always connecting team members and employees to the mission. Um, hey, even though this is just a game, but it's being built because it's a fun game. Or this transformation from the IBM AS400 that you're doing onto Redshift is really enabling the world's largest uh, book publisher of children to be more effective in their business. And what somebody sitting in Lahore or sitting in the U.S. with NorthBay was doing, they were tied to the actual mission every day, and that helps keep a culture. Um, on the topic of culture, transparency, learning from mistakes, and pride in your work were a few key things that we uh, fostered as cultural norms. As they say, culture is what you do. And so it was always, sticking back to those and always constantly fostering that culture. For example, turning the camera on in a video call, and believe it or not, we've been Zoom users for almost 6 years now. So this is way before the pandemic, before
Yeah.
Zoom was popular.
Yeah.
And many of those things, and then just generally, knowing what people want in their career, uh, providing them career ladders, uh, are all helpful ways of building a great team and a great company.
Balance, right? That's one of the tough parts of life, especially when you are an entrepreneur, and you want to, you're a motivated individual and you see, your hard work pay off. I'm curious, for you, how did you manage, working hard, but also, maybe giving time to your personal life and family?
Yeah, in some parts of that, it was hard and challenging. Like when I worked in Lahore for the venture-backed company, there would be like really long hours. In fact, I think the reason I actually left was that I kind of got burnt out. I was younger and didn't have kids at that time, so that was fine. Um, Later in my career, I have always worked hard, but I've always tried to maintain that balance. And now I think in this stage of my career, still, believe it or not, even investing in good companies is a lot of work, helping founders, supporting companies. Um, and one lucky thing that has happened is with the advent of technology, a lot of it can be done remotely. Like just like now we're doing a podcast recording where we're not in the same room. Uh, the flip side of that is that allows you for some flexibility of me picking up my daughter from school and so on. So I think you've highlighted a great point that we all need to look at balance on things. Um, but at times when you're building things, you have to kind of move the slider to a little bit on one side or the other. Of course, you don't want to go to the extreme at all, but to the extent possible, you adjust based on the stage that you're in.
Yeah. I'm curious. So one of the I don't know if you have an opinion on this, but one of the questions I get a lot from entrepreneurs is, in terms of finding a partner, who understands the lifestyle you're living. And I'm curious, if you had any advice on that personal side of, finding the person to marry and then, also managing, becoming a father and kids, things like that.
I mean, of course, that partnership is very important for any entrepreneur. Um, and I think, it will be a process for you or anyone to find their partner. Um, I couldn't comment on, how to do that. I've not been in that game for a while. Um, but I think, of course, it helps to talk what your ambitions are. And I think in some ways it also depends on finding that situation. If one partner is working on a more stable income and another partner is working on a more, variable income, it might work out. And I've actually personally observed that happening very well or working very well and actually flipping the roles where the other partner has now become a founder and the previous founding exited partner now is doing the stable things.
Yeah.
Um, but I think it's really important to, as you or young folks, work on finding their partners to have these things be in mind, and that's what marriage is all about. It's finding and building a partnership.
Yeah. I don't know if you want to talk about this. I mean, I can cut it out, but I saw you left in 2019. Was that mainly because angel investing had become more of your life? I saw you were, a member of Launchpad since 2017.
Yeah, I think it did become much more pronounced, and then I decided to do all of this full time. Um, my partners are running NorthBay, and it's still a tremendous and a successful company. Um, for me, it became like, what else do I want to do? And in the meanwhile, angel investing and then investing more had emerged so much that I just decided to do it full time.
Yeah. I guess, a lot of individuals, have the desire to become an angel investor, right? I'm curious, and I'm sure a lot of younger folk message you on LinkedIn on, trying to, learn what you have to say about that. I'm curious how you look at that and, um, you know, yeah, I don't know if
Yeah,
you have any thoughts
I
on that.
I think, look, in the big picture sense, venture capital and hence by implication angel capital, or generally venture capital, meaning money for crazy ideas, has been one of the most important things the world has done in making things a lot better for humans. And I see that continuing, tremendously. There's still a lot of problems to be solved. Um, so I think by implication, then young people should definitely think of becoming involved. And that could be while you're young, building companies. But then later, or as you get some money, investing in these companies. And that's what angel investing can be about. Now, to be clear, you can actually angel invest with very small amounts, even if you're not an accredited investor yet. And the new crowdfunding regulations allow people to invest as little as $100 into a startup. Uh, so for really young folks who want to get into it, maybe don't have a $250,000 to start investing in angel investing, then maybe, and you want to allocate $5,000, $10,000 to investing in companies, you could get started by angel investing via the crowdfunding, equity crowdfunding method. Now, then later, there are other ways of getting involved in venture as well, which is working at a venture capital firm. So now you're not investing your money, but you're working and helping find companies, invest in, evaluate those companies, and then invest in those companies. Um, and for that, also, the general advice would be, be curious about the space, connect with startups, learn about some area and expertise. Again, maybe invest a few $100s to try and learn, and then seek opportunities for being an associate or somebody who works at uh, venture investment field. Now, when you do have some money, you've exited your company even though you're young. I think people ought to definitely look at this asset class as one of the areas that they should be investing in, among other areas like, I don't know, real estate or public equities. And maybe people even recommend maybe between 5 to 10% of your investable assets to go into this asset class. And then you have kind of two options. One, you could be hands-on and do angel investing yourselves, either as an individual or join angel groups and do it as a group. Or you could give capital to funds that invest into companies. And that's also giving you the same result. But that's in the case either you're not interested or are not able to, in terms of time, etc., to do the work in investing. But I think young folks have great options and a spectrum of these options for getting involved.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so I saw 2019, you raised your first fund for Beacon Venture Partners. Is there any advice that you would give to someone trying to do something similar on, raising a fund? I'm sure that a lot of that was, you know, previous networking and previous connections that you had and things like that.
Well, raising a fund is also similar to raising money for your startup in the sense that it requires fundraising. These funds also, believe it or not, go to investors up the stream and say, could you give us money so we can invest as investors into these early stage companies? So, in fact, it turns out that raising a fund in some ways is actually harder than raising money for a startup, because you're asking for a lot more money and the money is stuck for a pretty long time. These funds have a life of 10 years or more. Um, so advice for raising a fund would be, um, first decide if that's really what you want to do. Don't do it for, hey, just because it's sexy and cool to raise funds or to be in VC. It's actually an incredibly hard work on many ends, although it's very rewarding both intellectually and if you did it right monetarily as well. Um, but it's not at the least an easy job. So first decide, why you want to do it and really that you want to do it. If you decide that you want to do it, then there are a bunch of resources available to you to learn. Increasingly, the world of venture capital has been becoming transparent, and that has also happened on the limited partner side or the LP side. Um, there are similar incubators and accelerators that can help you with the journey. One that I'll mention is run by Founders Institute called VC Lab. And you can also you basically learn, and then ultimately you actually have to do a good amount of work to go and find investors for your fund.
Yeah. How did you develop that thesis for Beacon Venture Partners? And, I guess why do you think people entrusted you with their money? Do you think they trusted your intellectual ability, or especially just being
Mhm.
this your first time doing
Yeah.
your own fund?
I think the thesis, first of all, is not thematic, meaning Beacon Venture Partners is not a fund that'll only invest in AI companies. The thesis of the fund is based on um, kind of two or three things. One is geography, and the geography is where we know what's going on in the innovation circle. So that's Boston, New England, New York, New Jersey, basically Northeast, where we have some uh, good ways of what is called deal flow. We can see a lot of companies that are in this ecosystem. So first thesis was around geography, and again, the reason was me and Alex Brown are from this area, and we've been connected to the innovation ecosystem for a decade or more, and we have a pulse on the deal flow. The second part of the thesis has been around this notion of capital efficient companies. We at Venture in general invest in only high growth stories. But there's even difference between a high growth story that requires maybe 10, $15 million to be raised in the lifetime of the company before an exit, or a company that needs to raise hundreds of millions of dollars already by definition of the kind of company that it is to get to the exit. We are going to look for the first kind, which is the capital efficient companies. And the reason for that is that angels and small funds are able to support that company with follow on investing all the way through exits. And lastly, the thesis is based on kind of a roughly sector agnostic, but some focus on software and tech in general, a little bit of hardware, life science, medical device, but predominantly a bulk in the middle of B2B software as our focus, because we have expertise, skills, and talent in that area that we can help with. Um, Folks who gave us money entrusted us because of our previous reputation in terms of investments and in terms of being able to run a process for reliably and effectively finding these companies. Beacon Venture Partner also relies on deal flow from the Launchpad Venture Group, Angel Group, and the 180 members are working to bring good companies, find them, evaluate them, and invest in them, and more important, support them with the human capital. And Beacon Venture Partner has that as its most effective process.
Yeah. I'm curious. I mean, I guess I feel like I'm asking you to give me all your knowledge, but um, as you look at your career as an angel investor, is there any advice you have on investing? I mean, looking at maybe your best investment and your worst investment.
So I think those are all just after the fact comments. Oh, this turned out to be my best investment. Oh, this turned out to be my worst investment. The first clarification in that is that there's no worst investment. The most you can lose is the money you invested. So all investments that return less than $1 on invested capital are kind of your bad investments. You could argue in some ways, like if you had a particularly painful experience losing your money, then you could say, oh, that was my worst investment. But generally speaking, this is an asymmetric world where your downside is fixed and known, but your upside is kind of unknown and not fixed. It actually can actually go pretty high, not infinity, but like there's very little bound on that. So there's also a saying that goes in investment circles. hey, am I a good investor? Am I a good investor? Ask me in 10 years. Because these companies, especially the best one, meaning the one that will give you the highest multiple return of 20x, 100x, or more, actually take a pretty long time to mature. Um, Within the group that Launchpad members have invested, there are many companies that have done tremendously well and have produced exceptional returns for investors. Um, uh, Companies that are valued in billions of dollars. Um, and then there are companies that only sold for a couple of $100 million. Doesn't sound a lot given the headlines, um, but investors actually made really good money because they were able to get into the company early enough and at a decent valuation. So I don't want to uh, put any names to worst or best investments,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
generally this is the kind of um, dynamics that venture investing happens. It's a very power laws driven returns. 90% of your returns are going to come from 10% of the companies that you invested.
yeah. I'm curious on the other side, I'm sure you hear a good amount of pitches. Is there any advice you would give to someone pitching, whether it's Launchpad or Beacon Venture on, just I guess how to make
Yeah.
it an appealing pitch?
Well, the appealing pitch part is, there's tremendous amount of advice available saying, talk about the problem solution, why you, why now, how big is the market, all those good things. But I think the general advice that I'll give is that founders pitching for money should know and understand this notion that all investing is a matchmaking process. It's an inefficient process, but effectively you're trying to find the best investors for you. It turns out very commonly that something that's a great investment for one fund or one angel investor is a terrible, not fit investment for another fund or another angel. So really, the advice on pitching, is on the foundation of figuring out: am I talking with the right people? Meaning people for whom this would be a good investment. Do they even invest in what I do? Are they investing in the stage where I'm at today? It happens a lot where you didn't do that homework. And obviously, no matter how good your pitch is, you're going to get a no. They simply just don't do medical device investing, and you're pitching them a medical device company. Um, it's an imperfect process, but I think that would be my basic advice: to try to find what you're looking for and find investors that are good for you.
Yeah. Is there anything else? I'm gonna go to your podcast, but is there anything else on the angel investing that you wish more people asked you about? Or is there anything that's on your mind that you want to talk about?
I think we've covered it well.
Okay, cool. And then so 2020, you started the Onboards podcast. Do you want to talk about, what people can gain from tuning in there?
Yeah, absolutely. Onboard podcast was started by myself and my co-host Joe Ayoub. Joe Ayoub and I connected before 2020, and we would always talk about the topic of boards and governance. Joe himself is somebody who helps put together boards for companies and has been doing it for a little bit. And we both thought that the topic is kind of opaque. And it's like there's some mysterious world behind a boardroom where something happens. And these were the early days before the pandemic. And we thought, hey, a 30-minute podcast where a guest is from the board ecosystem, whether they be the CEO, board members, board chairs, other folks in the board world, Wouldn't it be great to talk and people can listen, when they don't have a meeting or when they're driving or on their walk or something like that? We started right before the pandemic. So we did used to record in a podcast studio before, you know, getting it onto Zoom. But we have had a great number of tremendously talented, experienced guests, and we cover a really wide range of topics, even within the governance and board world, um, from recruitment to ESG to role of a corporate counsel on boards to all the way to advocacy of LGBTQ uh, to be on more boards, and everything in between. So it's a super great way of learning in a short amount of time on board and governance topics. If folks are interested, to tune in. It's onboardspodcast.com.
Yeah. Uh, Two more questions I have before we wrap up. The first is, and you take this on a personal or professional lens. I'm curious, like, what has been your motivation and what has kind of been your purpose throughout your journey?
Wow, that's a really good question. I think in some ways you're always searching for that purpose, and it changes. Believe it or not, when I was a kid, the purpose at that time was just really to get educated and be somebody. And I think maybe in recent time it's really about family and people around you, and making things better for yourself and for people around you is kind of the easiest way to say it. I think now I find myself in a mission where I'm so privileged and humbled to be able to help startups that really make an impact. So in some ways, you really feel a lot of weight on your shoulders to um, help build the innovation ecosystem, help foster that, and make it better for everybody.
Yeah. The second one, and again, you don't need to answer this if you don't want to. I'm curious, as you look back at your life, obviously people are going in to tune in, because of, you've had an accomplished career. I'm curious, do you have any regrets, whether it's personal or professional, on any aspect of what's gone on, or something you would pass on as a learning lesson?
Well, I mean, there are, of course, many lessons. I don't think regret is a word that I'll use, but I think generally I'm kind of subscriber to the philosophy that you make decisions on a regret minimization framework. Might as well do this so that when I'm old, I don't regret not doing it. So I don't have any particular regret. I think that's actually a good way of thinking about the future and deciding, saying, "Hey, I have the choice of either starting this company or not starting this company." Maybe I think of it as, would I regret if I'm old? Saying, oh, geez, I should have started that company. And maybe in that case, you use the regret minimization theory to say, I should start a company.
Awesome. Well, Raza, we covered quite a lot, from your beginnings in Pakistan to where you are today. I'm curious if there's anything else that you want to share in terms of life or anything like that. Feel free to do so.
Now I'm very grateful for you having me on your podcast. I'll just plug in saying, if you are looking for funding, look up Launchpad Venture Group and hit the apply for funding button. And we're always happy to look at companies in the Boston, New England geography that are early stage, are tech enabled, and connect you to angels and funding.
Yeah. Well, Raza, I want to just thank you for coming on. I really appreciate, you sharing your journey and then all of your learnings as an entrepreneur. and as an angel investor.
Thank you, Arnav, for having me.